Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today we're with a very special guest, Dr. Einat Wilf. She is a former member of the Knesset and the author, together with Adi Schwartz, of The War of Return. And Einat is someone who, whenever I want to know what's happening with the other side and how we can actually defeat our enemies on the other side, I think that Einat is someone who we should really talk to, and we've been having these conversations throughout our show, and Einat was with us in Hebrew, so I thought it was important to bring her and speak to our English audience. So Einat, it's a great pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
So Einat, we're a year and a half into this horrible war. We still have hostages in Gaza. We had a deal, I guess the first phase, and now we don't have the second phase, and we're back to fighting in Gaza. Hamas, during this ceasefire, got a lot of its weapons back in and made all these booby traps, we know, and got more soldiers from people in Gaza to be part of it. We've also seen, obviously, the protests of the Gazans. Where are we now? Is it really even possible at this point to win? What's happening?
Well, in order to win, you have to define the enemy correctly. And what we did from the beginning is we defined the enemy badly. And if you wage a war based on a lie, then everything that you build on a lie is going to come out crooked.
Exactly.
And the lie, of course, is that Hamas does not represent the Palestinians, that there is some kind of artificial separation between Hamas and the population of Gaza. And that is a complete lie. It's a comforting lie. People want to believe in it, but it's a lie all the same. And again, if you build things on a lie, they come out crooked, and you're stuck, as we all are. I remember when President Biden came to Israel shortly after October 7th. He was clearly deeply rattled and moved. He gave a beautiful speech. But then in that speech, he said, but Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. And he said that because just before that, in his speech, he spoke about the evil that was unleashed on that day. And I think people feel a deep sense of discomfort to acknowledge that this evil was unleashed in the name of an ideology that is shared by millions, I would even say tens of millions of people, if not more. So in order to deal with this and to kind of turn away the gaze, people say Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. And I remember listening to that in real time and saying, oh, we're going to pay dearly for that sentiment. And my main criticism of the Israeli leadership in general, and the Prime Minister in particular, is that this was a moment for a better leader for this country to stand up and say, thank you, President Biden, for everything that you're doing for us, for the aircraft carriers, for the don't. You saved us. But unfortunately, all the evidence is that Hamas very much represents the Palestinians, that they are merely the executive arm of the deep ideology that I've come to call Palestinianism, that negates and rejects a Jewish sovereign presence anywhere between what they call the river and the sea. So I, as a prime minister, if I continue that imaginary speech, am not going to send soldiers to a battle based on a lie. I'm not going to send Israeli soldiers to fight in Gaza with the lie that they only need to fight Hamas. Just like the American president in December 1941 did not declare war on Japanese pilots. He declared war on Japan.
Yes.
And Britain declared war on Germany. And they waged war until Japan collectively surrendered and until Germany collectively, unconditionally surrendered. So because we waged the war based on a lie, we're stuck. Mm-hmm. because Hamas very much it represents not just the Palestinians. What it did on October 7th, it did in the name of the core Palestinian ideology. Which is what I've come to call Palestinianism, which has 4 core tenets. From the river to the sea, there will be no Jewish state, and we are therefore perpetual refugees until return. And return, as we also discuss in our book, to the extent that anyone harbored any notion that this was some soft nostalgia to a great-grandparent's home, return was always imagined as October 7th, as a brutal triumph over the Jewish body, its desecration. You even have descriptions in Palestinian Arab texts from the 50s, from the 60s. We will tear their hearts out of their bodies, their fingernails from their limbs. You know, when in the early versions of the War of Return, we didn't include these descriptions because we felt it was a bit much. But now we're writing an updated version of the book, and we included it because that's what happened. And we saw the euphoria on October 7th throughout Gaza. Everyone saw it. Every kidnapped person saw it. They all described the euphoria, the glee. And it's not just in Gaza. It was in the West Bank. It was wherever Palestinians live, wherever their collaborators and supporters of Palestinianism live. And it's not because they were escaping an open-air prison. We know it was a lie. As soon as that lie was revealed, it was replaced by new lies. They were euphoric because for decades they've been groomed for this day. So they saw it happening. They saw it on the GoPro cameras of Hamas. That's why Hamas were live streaming the events, because they knew they had an audience for it. They knew people would love to see it. So in order to win this war, like it was against Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, any enemy that has a total ideology, that is not looking to just, get back some, territory which they believe is their own.
Yes.
An enemy that has a total, I would say, annihilationist ideology. The only way to win the war is to define the enemy as the total enemy and to wage the war until the enemy surrenders. And it means that you create no artificial divisions. From the beginning, Israel was forced to operate. And again, my criticism of our leadership is that we somehow accepted it without even standing up for our core interests. I have so many people who are trying to constantly justify this Israeli government. And I'm like, look, at the end of the day, if all you're telling me that an Israeli prime minister merely caves into foreign pressures, then I don't need an Israeli prime minister.
We could be the 51st state.
Cut off the middleman. Especially when it comes to our core interest, if it's like, this tariff, that tariff, whatever, but our core interests are very survival. All we're doing is caving in, then why are you trying to lead the Jewish people? So Israel immediately caved in to 3 assumptions that are in no other conflict. The first is that Gaza's territorial integrity has to be maintained. Why? After World War II, not only did Nazi Germany have to sign an unconditional surrender, it paid with substantial territory, displaced population, and not just Nazi Germany. Each one of its allies had to go through a process of paying in territory, reparations. So it was made clear that they were on the losing side of this war. So somehow it was understood that Gaza's territorial integrity has to be maintained. Again, why? 2, that the population should stay. Everywhere else, even on the most basic humanitarian reason, if there are people who don't want to be in the war, let them go.
Yes.
Let them out. Hold Egypt's feet to the fire according to international norms, according to treaties. It has to allow to people to leave, to find refuge if they don't want to be in the battle. And third is that Israel has to supply its enemy. Excuse me? And of course, that's based on this artificial separation, because if the problem is only Hamas, again, this notion that Hamas is some alien force that landed in Gaza to hijack its people who have no connection. I mean, Hamas is of its people, for its people. Yes. So why and in which war in history did the party which suffered the invasion, the butchery, the massacre, have to supply its enemy as the war is going on, as the hostages are being held? Where are these? And not only were these three kind of bizarre limitations placed on Israel from the beginning, and Israel caved in, it's people. If Israel dares not comply with them, it's presented as if Israel somehow breached a law that everybody acknowledges is so obvious. But it's exactly the opposite.
Yes.
So if you're doing everything crooked, if everything is based on a lie, then it's not going to be surprised that a year and a half later, you're like, why is this not moving forward? Yes, because you're fighting the wrong war. Mm-hmm. Fight the correct war, and you can actually win it.
Okay, so now I think I agree with almost everything you said, which is good. But now we are with a new president. So
yes.
We know that first of all, the rhetoric has changed, I think, 180. Just before we even get to like the plan that President Trump put forward, it's more of a general plan at this point. And I think it does. Yesterday we were recording this on a Tuesday, and yesterday the president was with the prime minister at the White House, and one of the things that he was asked about is letting the people out of Gaza. And he basically said what you said: if they want to leave, they should be allowed to leave. Why not? Like, why are we holding people in Gaza? Which is, it should be obvious, no? Like, it's not, because I remember in the beginning, transfer, we're pushing people out. If they want to leave, why not? Like, if I want to leave Israel, I can leave. Why can't they leave Gaza? But, so there's new rhetoric, and we're going back to the war in order to pressure Hamas to get back to the negotiating table. No one is actually saying at this point that we're going in to destroy Hamas. And so, but we still have the two other limitations that you said are still there. So number one, we are still treating the Palestinian people in the same way that they're different from Hamas. Till this day, I don't think anyone in Israel has officially said, or even remotely said, that Hamas and the people in Gaza support Hamas, that they are basically one and the same. They're Hamas. Gaza is Hamas. Hamas is Gaza. 18 years of control. The population has been brainwashed by them. Even the Palestinian Authority pretty much agrees, maybe with different tactics, but they agree with the end result. And so it's the same people. You write about this in the book a lot, and you speak about it. And the second is that Israel is saying, we're withholding aid now, but we will give in the aid if you just give us a little bit here and there. We'll give you the aid because we need to give you the aid because that's what is expected of us. That's the right thing to do. Yediot Achronot yesterday or 2 days ago said, yeah, Israel's getting ready to give on all the aid soon. So do we have a chance to win just on the fact that the rhetoric has changed, that the pressure is not there like it was before? Are you more optimistic they'll come to the table because we are going to apply the pressure, or is there we should just like give in, basically wait for the next opportunity because there's no chance even?
What I'm concerned is the opposite, about that we do not have pressure for an American administration, but we're still not doing what we need to do. A few weeks ago, I wrote a tweet in Hebrew. It was after a few hostages came out looking as if they just came out of a concentration or a death camp. And you could see that the American president was rattled, and he pretty much told Israel, do whatever you need to do.
And we didn't do anything.
So I tweeted, I said, when I saw that Israel's doing nothing, I said, I want to get this right. Did the American president just give us a blank check and we went and bought a hot dog?
Exactly.
In Hebrew, I said, bisli b'makolet. But But yeah, I mean, by the way, and I think people are seeing it. And again, that has to do with my criticism within Israel. If you will allow me, I call this sometimes the Palestinization of the right. The endless whining
Yes.
and blaming everyone else and
Yes.
excuses, but never actually taking action. And it's maddening because you're right. We do have the support. By the way, I believe that if we had, again, a better, more courageous, less cowardly Israeli prime minister to stand on October 8th and to say, from our separating lines with Gaza, they're closed. We're sorry. We were duped. We believed that the people of Gaza wanted a better future, that they wanted more jobs, they wanted more money. We were duped. It was part of a grand plan to lull us into kind of not defending our borders. We're closing them. They have a border with Egypt. Long before we went into Rafah, we said nothing about the border with Egypt. I called it the disappearing border with Egypt. Hold Egypt's feet to the fire. Say, they have a border with Egypt. Egypt is welcome to supply them. It clearly supplied them before October 7th, above and below ground. So they have a border with Egypt. Our borders are closed. And certainly from our side, nothing goes in until the hostages come out. And if the Biden administration would have said you're getting no weapons, then this is exactly the moment for an Israeli prime minister who truly understands the core interests of his country to stand up and say, nothing goes in until the hostages come out. And I can assure you that that kind of simple, not foaming in the mouth crazy declarations, calm, collected, secure, if he had repeated that, I can assure you that America would have given us everything we need, because the people of America would not have allowed an American president to withhold weapons from a country that calmly says, look at what they did. Nothing goes in until the hostages come out. But we did everything, the people of Israel rose to the occasion, mobilized, sacrificed, and our leadership sank to the occasion. And we're still, as a result, stuck here. Great acts of bravery and dedication from the people of Israel, from the soldiers. But ultimately, if you're fighting the wrong war against the wrong enemy, as they say in Hebrew, what did you think it's going to be? Kola? I mean, what did you think will come out of it?
So what you're saying is that even now you don't think that the decision makers, the policy makers don't have the right. They're still fighting yesterday's war, which was the wrong war anyway.
Exactly.
Basically.
Yeah, even now, like you said, they're talking about continuing to supply the enemy. By the way, it's not humanitarian aid. If anything, it's anti-humanitarian aid. It extended the war. It extended the suffering. Actually, over the years, in various matters of policy, it's true also for other fields, from parenting to governance, I've separated between what I call feeling good and doing good. So it feels good to say that you're giving humanitarian aid. It actually doesn't do good.
Yes.
We know that it extended the war. It secured Hamas's ability to continue the war, to hold the hostages. It extended everything, the suffering. Actually, something that sounds tough, that perhaps doesn't feel good, to say nothing goes in until the hostages come out. That would have made the war shorter.
Saved a lot of lives.
Actually would have saved a lot of lives, reduced suffering, would have also focused people on who the real enemy is, what the war is really about. Yeah. That's what you want a wartime leader to do. What we have is the opposite.
One other question about what you've been saying is one of the things that we've been hearing since day one in some parts of Israel, and it's been growing, I think, since, is the fact that people say you can't beat an ideology. I think it's a ridiculous statement, but I want to hear what you have to say. Could we beat an ideology? Because if it is Hamas is an ideology, also. But every organization has an ideology. Nazis in Germany had an ideology. They were defeated and surrendered. There still are Nazis in the world, but it's not Nazi Germany with the Wehrmacht and the
Exactly.
Luft. It's the same. So can we beat the ideology when 2 million, I don't know how many people in Gaza are, 1 million, 2 million, we don't know exactly the numbers, but they tend to inflate them. But can we beat the ideology?
Of course. And I'll explain. First, on the kind of the more broad theoretical place. Ideologies are constantly defeated.
Yes.
Every moment, every day. We today hold ideas that were unimaginable 20 years ago. We look with scorn and contempt at ideas that people held 40 years ago. I'm not talking 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, even gay marriage.
Everything.
And,
Ideologies change all the time, and they are replaced by new ideologies. What does it mean for an ideology to die? Like you said, some people can still harbor it, but once an ideology languishes at the margins of society, for all intents and purposes, it's dead. So, I'm not saying like stamp out every last person living in a basement but by and large, when it is languishing at the margins of society, it's dead.
Yes.
And that's my definition of killing an ideology. So first of all, on the theoretical basis, of course it's possible. It happens all the time. What we have with Palestinianism is that it's an ideology that's been allowed to constantly be sustained and fueled. So of course it never dies, because not only does no one try to kill it, it is constantly fueled and sustained. This is why I've invested so much of my time in writing and researching about UNRWA, which is fueling station number one for Palestinianism. It's not some fringe organization. So what are the steps of killing an ideology? If you move from, first of all, it is possible, you define it. What is the how? First, step one is to actually define that this is the goal. Yes. Like you said, we're not even having that discussion. We don't even have leadership that says, this is the Palestinian ideology, this is Palestinianism. Unfortunately, it unites the Arabs living in Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Columbia University. This unites them. It's an ideology that seeks nothing constructive.
Yes.
It's all about destroying. This is why it brings destruction everywhere. There's no magic here. There's no mystery. This is a terrible ideology that not only can die, it should die.
Yes. Because
it's a terrible ideology that has only ever brought suffering and destruction everywhere that it lives. So step one is even define this as the goal. Then you say this ideology must die so that Jews and Arabs can finally live.
Yes.
Okay, now how do you now you define it? You do two main things. First is, like every good general, close down the fueling stations. Make sure that there's no sustenance to this ideology. What sustains this ideology? Organizations like UNRWA, the idea of return, the idea of perpetual refugeehood. We'll discuss the Trump plan, but for example, one of the responses on the Arab side to the Trump plan was like, oh, you can't displace the people of Gaza. Gaza is their home. I'm like, excellent. First time I'm hearing of it, because for the last 75 years, you've been telling us that Gaza is not your home. That even if you were a fifth generation Arab Gazan, you are actually a Palestine refugee from the river to the sea. So you're telling us, 75 years too late, that Gaza is your home? Wonderful. We're going to lock that in. You are going to be erased from UNRWA's records as refugees. Yeah. You're not refugees. By the way, apropos waging the correct war, if Israel had been able to create a situation where the Arabs of Gaza are erased from UNRWA's records as refugees, that would have been a greater defeat than any tunnel that is being blown up. So that's one direction. Begin to end, as much as possible, the fueling stations. Again, not everything is within our control. we can do so much more than what we've been doing. We've allowed this fuel into Palestinianism to just flow. We've even secured its routes into like Palestinianism. That's one direction. The other direction is to correctly use this moment of destruction. When after October 7th, you began to hear this phrase of like, what Israel is doing in Gaza will further radicalize the Palestinians. And I remember listening to that and thinking, I don't know how much more they can be radicalized. Guys, this is it. And it comes from an idea that is easy to empirically disprove that I've come to call trauma determinism. What does trauma determinism say? If you've suffered violence, you will only ever use violence. I'm like, first of all, it's empirically untrue. People behave in different ways in response to violence. Societies respond in different ways. So, Exhibit A, the Jewish people,
Yes.
we've suffered a lot of violence. The Nazis suffered violence. The Japanese suffered violence. They are now pillars of world peace. What matters is not that you suffer violence. What matters is how it gets processed. And one of the greatest tragedies of the conflict is what I call a tragedy of ceasefires. Basically, whenever the Arabs go to war, with the declared purpose, to their credit, they make it very clear, of annihilating the Jewish state, and they fail, what happens next is a ceasefire, essentially a redo.
Yes.
They always get a redo. And again, you don't have to be a great strategist and logician to understand that if you constantly get a redo, you're incentivizing endless war. You're basically never telling them it's over, you've lost, and move on. Again, if we compare World War I and World War II, World War I ends with a ceasefire, basically, an armistice. And then Germany is forced to pay all this like compensation and territory, and they begin to say, but hey, we didn't lose. We were about to be victorious. Our victory was stolen from us. We were stabbed in the back by the Jews, by the Bolsheviks. And this gives rise to both appeasement, because people like the British were like, yeah, they really were treated badly. The Nazis are like, we were stabbed in the back. So in World War II, the Allied leaders are determined that this time around, there will be no question as to who lost and who won. There's going to be no ambiguity. There's going to be not just surrender, unconditional surrender, reparations, displacement, territory. There's going to be no question. So what was key here is that this time, and that's what we need to happen here, is there was a connection between the destruction and the ideology. And the Palestinians have been able to evade and avoid that for about a century. Any notion of consequences, any notion of cause and effect, action and consequences. Again, one of the good things that the Trump plan does, regardless of whether it's implemented, it began to reintroduce the quaint idea of consequences. And we are at this moment where I fear we might lose, where what needs to be put together is a connection that says to the people of Gaza, but I would say to Palestinianists more broadly, this destruction and ruin in Gaza, and I'm not denying that there's destruction and ruin in Gaza, it is the outcome of your choice. It is the consequence of your destructive ideology. That's what it looks like. Because just like in personal life, as in collective life, moments of destruction and ruin can become moments of great transformation and growth.
Yes.
But only if you accept responsibility. If you blame everyone and you whine about how unfair the world is and everyone's responsible except you, you will never get out of it. But if you go through a process, and in this case, they have to be forced to go through this process that says, this is the consequence of your choice.
Yes.
And you made the collective choice to not build Gaza for yourselves, but to weaponize it for the singular purpose of destroying what your neighbors have built. So this is what it looks like when you make that choice and nothing gets built. No dollar goes in. until you acknowledge that your ideology brought you to this ruin, and you begin the process of transformation. That's how you destroy an ideology.
Einat, what about the fact that there's been protests in the past month or so in Gaza to varying degrees? We don't know. There's a little bit of the debate how much widespread these protests, how authentic they are. It seems that at least some of it is authentic. You have been saying, and I agree, but I just want to get your take on it, that the Palestinians in general are pretty much Hamas. Hamas is the Palestinians, and yet we see that there is tension in Gaza. People are angry at Hamas to some degree or another. And then you hear people saying, this proves that they don't represent the Palestinians. Because here, look, these people are willing to go out, and these 100, 200 people in Jabalia are going out. That proves it. So how do you answer to those claims?
So I listen and I follow very, very carefully those protests. And what you can see is this. Clearly, some people are angry with the fact that there is ruin and destruction.
Yes.
And by the way, those are the people who were euphoric when they thought that Hamas was winning, when Hamas was bringing the dream of return. Now they're saying that this is not happening, and they're angry, and they're protesting. It's a moment, but again, a lot of depends on where this goes. Some of them, not all of them, this is the most promising element, have also said release the hostages. To the extent that this will create pressure, internal pressure on Hamas to release the hostages, that would be valuable. Remains to be seen. What is clearly not there is any disavowal of Palestinianism as an ideology. I follow this very closely. I have yet to see voices that say, not just out with Hamas, we don't want Hamas, get rid of Hamas, which is what we're hearing. I'm not hearing enough is enough. We want to live next to the Jewish state, not instead of it. Enough with this idea of return. We don't need it. We want to build Gaza for ourselves. And by the way, those voices do not exist in the West Bank.
Yes.
Those voices do not exist in London. Those voices don't exist in Columbia University. There are 4 Palestinians who say those, truly righteous among the nations, but it just shows you how rare they are. So John Aziz, he's very
Twitter.
active on Twitter. Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib, who's now started Realign for Palestine, who's saying very clearly we need to end this notion of return. We need to build Gaza for the people of Gaza. So he's clear about it. Again, he's now in D.C. Historically, Mohammed Dajani. You have people like Bassem Eid. You have a few courageous voices.
But they're a minority of a minority.
I know. It's important to highlight them because, by the way, it shows what it looks like when people say things clearly. I've invented this word West-plaining. It's when Western diplomats, journalists, others explain away what Palestinians have said clearly. You also see a bit of West-plaining in these demonstrations in Gaza. People so deeply want to believe in the comforting lie that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. And by the way, I'm careful about saying Hamas Palestinians are Hamas, because then you go into is everyone a militant? No, but so I'm careful in my phrasing. I say Hamas is the executive arm of the Palestinian ideology. Yes. Hamas operates on behalf of the Palestinian people and has their support. Not every single Palestinian is a Hamas militant, clearly not, but they are the executive arm of the ideology of Palestinianism.
Yes.
So again, you have this West-plaining also about the demonstrations. But the reason that I highlight those courageous voices is that I want to tell people Palestinians are perfectly capable of speaking clearly. Nobody needs to explain, to West-plain for them. So when they want to end this war with the Jewish state, they're more than perfectly capable of saying it clearly. And right now, that's not what's happening in the demonstrations.
Yeah, well, if I understand you correctly, and I agree, is that the demonstrations are just saying we supported Hamas, we supported what they did, but now it's become too much for us.
Yes.
We don't want all this destruction. Let's just stop this for now so we can get back to Hamas is not good because they're not stopping it now, but our end goal is the same.
But that's why it's such a valuable moment, because
Yes.
when there are cracks, that's when you actually want to go all the way
Yes.
to demand surrender. Because at the end of the day, nothing succeeds like success and nothing fails like failure.
Yes.
This is why it has to be understood as a failure. And this is why Hamas fights so hard to ensure that it's success. This is how Hamas has been using the hostages with the backing of Qatar. It's been using them very effectively in order to ensure that it remains in power and that it can complete this arc and to say, look, not only did we do this to the Jewish state, we didn't pay a price.
Yes, exactly.
And sometimes people raise eyebrows. They're like, they don't pay a price. Who are you? And I'm like, you need to understand that from their perspective, the destruction, the killing, that's not a price. If at the end of this, they can show that Gaza's territorial integrity has been maintained, the people are there, Hamas is in power, and by the way, hiding behind some technocratic government is still Hamas is in power, and the billions of dollars continue to flow rather than them having to pay reparations to Israel for what they did, then they will say, look,
Yes.
this was a success. This was a great success. And we get a redo, right? We're back to where we started. We get a redo. And this is what they're fighting for. And this is why this is a moment not to kind of, say, oh, great, these are demonstrations, we're over, but to really push all the way to the moment of complete surrender so that there is a total acknowledgement of defeat.
Einat, just shortly on the Trump plan, we mentioned it a few times. Is it really, one of the things that I said, and I just want to get your opinion, is that just the fact that it was brought up as an option by someone like the American president, it gives legitimacy to, like you said, to something that people were scared to talk about before. That it's like, yes, obviously, if someone wants to leave Gaza, you should be allowed to leave Gaza, but no one was able to say it before, at least on the world stage. Is that what you think the main thing that did?
I think it does so much more than that. I think, first of all, what the plan did is introduce the idea of breaking the mold, right? Because we've been stuck for a century in this repeated pattern that have come to call the Jews are never allowed to win, the Arabs are never allowed to lose, or certainly never allowed to acknowledge defeat. Yes. Again, this is why I focus so much on UNRWA. UNRWA sits at the original sin of telling the Arab refugees from the stupid war that they started that was entirely unnecessary. You know, there could have been an Arab state living next to a Jewish state, but no, it was more important for them that there be no Jewish state anywhere.
But isn't that one of the key tenets, like you said?
Exactly, that is Palestinianism.
Palestinianism is not to give us a state, it's to destroy the Jewish
Precisely,
state.
That's more important. So they go to war. They fail to achieve their goal of no Jewish state. They become refugees in the war. And rather than get the memo, which tens of millions of refugees in the world and who did not start stupid wars but still became refugees, they got the memo that said, it's tough, it's tragic, let's move on. What did the Arab refugees get? No, you didn't lose. Your victory is merely delayed. So that's why we're stuck.
You'll be back.
You get a redo. Yeah. So we've been stuck in this pattern that merely incentivizes war. So what the American president's plan did first is to say, I'm breaking the mold. This has not worked. Getting a redo, paying no consequences, that's a way to incentivize war. This is logic 101. So first of all, even that basic common sense of saying, I'm reintroducing the idea of consequences, which seems to have been so missing from this conflict, and again, has only ever incentivized war. He exposed the lie that, Gaza is our home. But again, we now have to lock this in and say, okay, fine. He, like you said, he made it clear, okay, if people want to leave, they should be allowed to leave. He also reminded people that Gaza has no objective problem. Why are trucks going into Gaza? Why do we have this notion of Gaza as a place of misery? Gaza is not some landlocked, windswept, drought-ridden place that needs outside aid. as the American president correctly saw, it sits on a gorgeous piece of the Mediterranean. Beautiful beaches, crossroads of ancient trade routes, excellent soil. Objectively, it has everything to be a prosperous trade center. Really, no objective geographical problem.
Yes.
The only problem is here. It's political. It's ideological. So again, what the plan highlighted is the problem is that people made an ideological choice to turn a beautiful piece of territory into a single integrated weaponized landscape where everything is connected, everything is part of fighting a war. And again, a stupid, moronic war for the goal of no Jewish state anywhere between the river and the sea. So long before this plan is being implemented, it already served to highlight some really basic ideas that got kind of lost, and just to reintroduce some basic common sense to how this conflict should be resolved.
Yes. And I think that it's pretty obvious that even, let's say, there is a way for Palestinians to get out, the Palestinian leadership doesn't want them to get out. They would rather their own people die and stay in conflict than leave. And it just goes to show how sick the ideology that you call the Palestinianism, to use your own people in order to destroy the other side's ability to live.
That's the entire tragedy.
Yes.
of ultimately, if you kind of zoom out for a moment, ultimately it's a terrible, terrible tragedy. An entire people who have been sustained and fueled and supported for the singular goal of destroying the Jewish state.
Yes.
You know, precisely because this is what they've been organized around, they've been always supported by every anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist power in history, from the Nazis to the Soviets to the Pan-Arabists, now to Iran. And again, by the way, because Palestinianism is an ideology of obsessive destruction, everyone who supports it ultimately gets destroyed. Again, there's no magic here. And, you know, the Nazis and the Soviets and the Pan-Arabists, and I think we're seeing the Ayatollah regime go in that direction. I genuinely hope that Qatar and Turkey, who are angling to be the new sponsors of Palestinianism, will also find that it destroys them. You know, the woman who played Snow White, you know, she was destroyed by it. It's like, it's... Someone compared it once to The Ring. You know, it's like this very attractive ideology, but ultimately...
Don't get close.
Yeah, ultimately it destroys its wear. Yeah, if you zoom out, it's a terrible, terrible tragedy. This is why I say, not only can this ideology be killed, it should be killed so that the Jews and Arabs can finally live.
Okay.
Nothing good has ever come out of sustaining this ideology.
So one of the things that I saw someone asked you in an interview not too long ago that you did while I was looking to our conversation was someone asked you, did October 7th or something, it was you, a few other people, I don't remember exactly where, did October 7th kill the two-state solution? And I found it funny because I think the Palestinians never really wanted a two-state solution. The Israelis were the ones throughout the years that were sort of just please give us this two-state solution. Whether it was the Oslo, from even before, but let's say the Oslo Accords, and then Barak and Olmert and all these other, even Netanyahu, as much as he was in the Bar Ilan speech, and
absolutely.
If the Palestinians would have came, maybe he would have, but they never came. They always found a reason not to come, and I think October 7th wasn't the deathbed; it was killed right as it was born, right?
It was It was never alive.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I tell people, it's like, people like to tell this like story. Oh, there was a moment when Palestinians really, really, really wanted a two-state solution, and Israel built settlements, and two-state. I'm like, no. There was never in the last century a moment when there was an Arab-Palestinian vision of peace, of two states, when one of the two is the Jewish state.
Exactly.
So I tell people, the Jews have always agreed, going back to the creation of Transjordan, have always agreed to any two-state solution provided one of the two is the
Is
Jewish
Jewish.
state. That's our one non-negotiable. And the Arabs have always rejected every two-state solution if one of the two is the Jewish state. So, no, it was never killed because it was never alive.
Yes. You mentioned Qatar. So in Israel, for those who aren't, we're speaking, most of our watchers are in the US and the UK, but everybody's invited, so obviously. But I know from the demographics that most of our US and UK, and usually most of them obviously are Israel supporters. So in Israel, one of the big stories now is Qatar. So two of the prime minister's top advisors, one of which has been with him for 15 years, almost Orich, his personal spokesperson, have been arrested. And the charges, as I understand it, is that they basically were either getting money or being influenced, depending on who you ask, by Qatar itself to basically give its messaging to the Israeli public through newspaper people, journalists, feeding them daily, I guess, things from the Qatari perspective, as sort of saying it's coming from the prime minister's office. So they would say to a journalist, again, this is all everybody's innocent to prove them guilty, but the gist of it is, we're telling a journalist, here, look, take this info, and sort of replaying this is from the prime minister's office when it's actually from Qatari propaganda. So we don't know how true it is. We'll see. But it's obvious that Qatar is working very hard in the world in general. We know the universities in the West and all this, but also in Israel, to really work hard to try to make people think that Israelis know that Qatar is a sick terrorist supporting country, right? So what do you think is behind all this?
So I seem to have developed a specialty in calling out organizations, countries that people think are nice. And I'm like, no, they're nefarious. For years when I was working on UNRWA, people would be like, what does they not want from UNRWA? They're just providing assistance. They have the letters UN. And I'd be like, no, this is the ideological, logistical infrastructure of the forever war of Palestinianism, of the war for the destruction of the Jewish state. It's nothing less than that. It's even worse than Hamas, because it is, even if Hamas is gone tomorrow, if UNRWA stays, it will birth another organization by another name, because what remains is the ideology. Qatar is the same. All you need to do is open a map. Qatar is physically incredibly vulnerable. A little Saudi invasion, and there's no Qatar, with all the oil and gas that it has, that makes it, of course, clearly attractive and vulnerable. And the way that it protects itself is essentially by putting money and bribing a variety, everyone, every sort of possible bribery, direct bribery, investments, money to think tanks, money to universities. Al Jazeera, as my colleague Dr. Shani Moore says, if you compare it to Russia today, the Chinese official stations, they don't get quoted in the West as much as Al Jazeera does. And he says the reason that Al Jazeera gets quoted so much by supposedly respectable Western media, which normally would not be caught dead quoting a slave-holding theocracy, is because of its anti-Semitism, thanks to its anti-Semitism, not in spite of it. That's what allows it to be so acceptable. This is how, by quoting Al Jazeera, Western media can launder. I would argue that the entire Palestinianist project is, for many Westerners, to launder their, shall we say, ambivalence with the existence of a Jewish state. So Al Jazeera, all the money, buying, from Harrods to fancy hotels to Paris Saint-Germain. This is also a form of bribery, because once you've bought these places, they have to say nice things about you, and they do.
But also the universities, they obviously are asking for influence on the actual curriculum.
The actual kind of who gets hired, who are the professors. Absolutely. And a complete nefarious actor. But, for a lot of Israelis, you said Israelis know they're a nefarious actor. Now they do. Yeah. But in the beginning, I spoke against Qatar from the beginning. I was like, I said, this government has failed Israel on 4 core interests. Badly defining the war, so saying that it's just Hamas, as a result supplying the enemy, and then failing to call out Qatar and Egypt. And as a result, you can't win if you're doing all of this wrong. And I kept on saying, I don't get it. By the way, there were also things that were really dangerous. There were neighborhoods in Gaza that were built by Qatar. Yes. Initially, soldiers had to be more careful in those neighborhoods, and Hamas used that advantage to the most until ultimately it was agreed that it was too dangerous to kind of
So you mean they didn't bomb it from above because it was Qatari? They didn't want to destroy it too much.
Exactly. So now people understand that it's been a nefarious actor. And what this prime minister has failed to do time and again is understand who Israel's enemies really are. And people tell me, oh, wait, not, but the military and our security services, they also failed. I was like, yes, and I've certainly written and called it out. But what's special about the prime minister, in addition to him being at the top and not exactly being new at the job, yes, is that if you listen to his Holocaust Day speeches over the years, the Israeli Memorial Day, in addition to all the talk about Iran, he always said how his father, the historian, said that the Jews lack an instinct for danger.
Yes.
The Jews don't know. And he essentially sold to the people of Israel that he will be the paranoid in chief. He will be paranoid on our behalf because we Jews, we lack an instinct for danger, right? So if this is your single promise, if it's one thing, if you come as a prime minister who says, I know nothing about security, I'm going to focus on the economy. But no, your singular promise to the people of Israel was that you will be the paranoid in chief. And you have failed again and again and again to identify yes, our actual enemies. Mm-hmm. In Hebrew, you say zilzul. There's no good English word that really combines the dismissiveness with the contempt that he had to the Palestinians. He still refuses to admit that he was played by Sinwar because Sinwar knew that he was dismissive of him, didn't take him seriously as an enemy. Yes. He thought he was some toddler in a tantrum that you can buy with more Qatari cash, rather than understanding that this is a serious enemy, a smart one with an ideology, with a strategy, with a plan. And he played it to the full. So what we're seeing, and recently even scarier, the prime minister in his effort to kind of deflect the danger.
Said that Qatar isn't an enemy.
Yeah, and that it's complex.
Yes, yes.
No, it is an enemy. And it's not just an enemy of Israel. It's an enemy of the Jewish people.
Yes, all over the world.
All over the world. Like, seriously. If you don't know who our enemies are, what are you doing in your job?
Yes. And I would just say that I 100% agree. But the thing is that, and we're not going to get into it because I have another question, but I just want to give my commentary. I agree with Einat 100%. I just think that in Israel, it's when you look at the alternatives and what they're saying, which is why Einat is so fresh, in my opinion, because she's not you're not parroting the talking points of the other side also. So you'll hear the other side say, everything is so bad, let's just give in. And you're saying, no, the opposite. The prime minister right now has been giving in because he's not fighting the right war. Let's fight the right war. And it's like you have two sides that are playing a game that'll not, both sides, if they win, won't be the winning for the country. Exactly. So if Netanyahu wins in the way he's talking now, we probably won't get to a victory for Israel. And if the other side wins, also. So it's like you have two sides that are fighting with each other over the wrong things. And that's very, very sad, I think.
Very.
So let me ask you something that is a little bit, you spoke about it, the Qatari, I guess, funding of universities. And one of the things that, Einat, you in your beginning, I guess, I don't know what you consider yourself now, but you started in the Labor Party of Israel on the left.
The party that used to know how to win wars,
yes,
right?
Exactly. The left in Israel always used to know how to win the wars.
Yes.
So, and which is so weird because when you look at the left today, even the left of Barack Obama, let's say in America, is so different than the left on college campuses.
Yeah.
And the left of Barack Obama is so different from JFK. And
Yeah.
so you have a sort of moving way, way to the more extreme left that somehow becomes race essentialism. We're always the civil rights movement, everybody according to their character, but now everybody's being judged by their race and the color of their skin. It's just the opposite. And obviously gender and all this kind of stuff. And Israel plays right into that because the weaker you are, the more bad you are, the more righteous you are, and the stronger you are, the more evil you are. That's the basic gist of everything that we're seeing in the West on these protests and etc., which is also why I think Trump won, because people are like disgusted by it and they're willing to go to the other side. And I just think that when you see people protesting with the Hamas flags or even the Houthi flags in college campuses with queers for Palestine. And in the beginning, Einat, I thought it was a joke. It's so stupid that I was like, this has to be a parody. And then you see, I was in NYU, my aunt lives there, and I'm walking by and I see a protest outside of Hillel, which is weird because they're not Zionists, they're just Jewish. And there's queers for Palestine flags in the... It's unbelievable. So what do you think is happening? Explain to us and just give us a little bit about how you... Obviously, you probably give lectures at universities and you've met these people.
So I'll explain why there is a perfect logic to all of this. I've spoken about it for years on something that I've come to call the Placard Strategy, because you see it on placards on anti-Israel demonstrations. And the placards are simple and ingenious. They're built like simple equations. One side says Israel, Zionism, Star of David, then an equation sign.
Yes.
And the Placard Strategy has been so successful that I doubt anyone has seen Zionism equals the political movement for self-determination and liberation of the Jewish people in their ancestral land. Granted, it's a long placard. It would be the only accurate one. The Placard Strategy has been so successful that everyone knows what's on the other side of it, right? Imperialism, colonialism, racism, apartheid, then it escalates ethnic cleansing, Nazism, genocide, Holocaust. If you're in America in 2020, it only says Zionism equals white supremacy.
Yes.
And that gives you a clue to how the Placard Strategy works. The words are chosen not because they reflect reality. If anything, they're the inversion of reality. Zionism is the most anti-imperialist, decolonial movement, saving Jews from living under systems of oppression, apartheid, being ethnically cleansed, not to talk even about genocide, Nazism, Holocaust. Those words are chosen because at the moment that they're being used, they are universal signifiers of evil. So what the Placard Strategy does is it creates this endless repetition. Israel, Zionism, Star of David equals evil. Israel, Zionism, Star of David equals evil. Now, the brilliance of the Placard Strategy is that it's not just in placards. It's in media, in social media. Give an anti-Israel speaker 30 seconds on television, regardless of the question, they will manage to say apartheid, racism, genocide, whatever you asked.
Yes.
I remember many, many years ago, I was in a conference, and there was a year when no one was dying. And the Palestinian speaker next to me said that Israel's committing a cultural genocide. And I remember thinking, what is that?
What is it?
And then I realized it doesn't matter. He just wanted to use the word genocide. This is many years ago because the word has already been waiting in the wings to kind of make it to the center. He just wanted to use the word next to Israel. So the brilliance of the Placard Strategy is that it gets repeated in media and social media, but most important, it gets laundered through institutions of prestige. So you'll get a PhD in Zionism as colonialism. You'll be tenured for Israel's committing apartheid. The UN General Assembly will pass a resolution, Zionism is racism. You'll take the case of genocide to the International Court of Justice. The UN the UN Human Rights Commission, you hear those 5 words, United Nations Human Rights Commission. You're imagining elderly men and women sitting around a round table thinking how to improve the human rights conditions of the world. You don't imagine Libya Iran, Qatar, but that's who they are. And they're obsessed with Israel. That's all they do. They constantly issue reports and condemnations of Israel. Now, most people don't care. They just hear UN, Human Rights Commission, said that Israel's evil. Then Israel must be evil. And I recently saw a short video by someone who was a former Soviet operative, not Bezmenov. And he had said how you do mass manipulation. And he said 4 things. He talked about repetition. That creates a sense of reality, especially when it comes from every direction. He talked about strong visual symbols. The placards are very strong visual symbols.
The pictures of babies and all this kind of stuff.
And he talked about feelings, anger, fear. But what I thought was most interesting, he talked about prestige. And he said the following. He said, prestige paralyzes judgment. And I thought, bingo. Because I've spoken for years about the need for respectability. But when he says prestige paralyzes judgment, what he's saying is, if the UN says it, if Harvard says it, if Columbia says it, then it's true.
Must be true.
Then people suspend judgment, and then you can have educated people who are so smug when it comes to anti-Semitism. You know, for years, I would speak about the history of the Jewish people, the rise of anti-Semitism in the 19th century as kind of the respectable cover to the old religious Jew kind of otherness. And one of the problems with discussing anti-Semitism with young people today is everyone is so smug. They believe that they would see it coming from a mile away. Mm-hmm. They're educated, they're smart, they would never fall for it. And they don't realize that they're falling for it as we speak. Because after October 7th, a new placard appeared. And it said the following, keep the world clean. And it had an image of a Star of David and flag of Israel in a trash bin.
Yes.
And when I saw that, I was like, this is it. This is the culmination of the Placard Strategy. Because after decades of being told 360, and from your most hallowed institutions that have the letters UN in them, that Israel Zionism Star of David equals evil. And you're a person who wants to do good. You're a young person on a college campus. Your very sense of who you are is that you want to do good in this world. Well, there's no greater good than eradicating evil.
Yes.
And the biggest failure of Holocaust studies is that people can go to museums and know about the death camps and know about the Nazis. How many are able to articulate a simple insight that everything the Nazis did was downstream from one idea, keep the world clean. In their case, racially clean, today's human rights clean. But the idea that there is a utopia, a clean world, and to birth that utopia from the terrible, messy, dirty world we live in, we need to get rid of the collective Jew. And now I'll explain why Queers for Palestine has perfect logic. Because if you posit that everything that Israel Zionism Star of David is evil, and that there is a world of utopia out there, it's no coincidence that while all the evil words are on the side of Israel Zionism Star of David, all the good words, justice, equality, freedom, rights, are on the side of Palestinianism, which is the negation of the collective Jew. It's supersessionism, it's destruction. So Palestine has become the marker of the global utopia because that is the world without the collective Jew, from the river to the sea. So once you understand that Palestine is not about the Arabs living in Gaza and the West Bank, that's why they don't care about the protests. Yes. It's by now an abstracted vision of a world of utopia without the collective Jew. And once you understand that, then Queers for Palestine and Feminists for Palestine, and Palestine is fighting climate change, and Palestine is worker rights, is perfectly logical because this is utopia. And this is why it is also dangerous, because it is the most ancient and dangerous idea in general. The idea that someone stands between you and a better world has always been a dangerous idea. But certainly when it comes to the notion that the collective Jew stands between us and utopia, That has been the most dangerous idea ever.
Yes, I agree. And Ayan Hirsiali, which was on our program, she said that and she agreed with you basically, and she also said that the Islamists, the Palestinians in this case, they have a plan what will be in the utopia.
Yes.
The other ones don't, and
Yes.
they'll be eaten at the end. So Israel will be destroyed, God forbid, but what will happen after? They'll eat you.
Oh.
They'll kill you, and so it's like it's dangerous, but it's also it's brainwashing. It's just a very it is dangerous. So I just wanted to
Yes.
underscore how stupid it is, but it has its own logic, basically.
And by the way, we saw that playbook in many places.
Yes.
Iran is certainly Exhibit A.
Yes.
The communists wanted to bring down the Shah. They made they kind of joined with the
Ayatollah.
Islamists, happy to bring down the evil regime of the Shah. And then we
saw
know
what
what happened
happened
to the communists.
Einat Wilf, it was a pleasure talking to you. I really hope everyone will watch this program because Einat, what we spoke about, I think encapsulates what we're up against here, and also why we haven't been successful, and the whole world is watching us. And if we're not successful, it'll be very bad for the whole world, not just for us. So for whoever is a freedom-loving person, a person who values Western values, Western ideas, well, my show is the Western Spirit. So it's important for Israel to win, and in order for Israel to win, they need to listen to actually identify the enemy. And without that, we won't be able to win. So Einat, is amazing to talk to you, and I really, really enjoyed our conversation. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.